welcome to my booktube.
Hi, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over my February TBR. So this includes books that I finished in February and books that I read the majority of in February, and then I also have one book that I forgot to bring up in my video last month where I did my recent read slash wrap up check-in for the past few months because I had disappeared for a while. Anyway, I'm back and I'm back into reading a lot and I have a lot to share with you, so I'm really excited to get into these books. So first, I know I mentioned in my February recent reads, or whatever I called it video, that I had started reading poetry before I go to bed because I've been having lots of difficulty sleeping lately, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to because of the pandemic. So the book that I read for the majority of February was Homebody by Rupi Kaur. This is a poetry collection and it mostly focuses on mental health, and I really liked this. It was very relatable. I also found, especially poetry focused on these sorts of topics, to be kind of like meditative and reflective and something that I really got to relax into and absorb. And so I really enjoyed reading this. I really enjoy her writing, and so I already have her next book, which is what I'm reading mostly in March, which I also just realized I didn't add to my March TBR, so surprise! I'm reading The Sun and All Her Flowers, also by Rupi Kaur, this month, so highly recommend if you are interested in poetry, especially poetry that's surrounded by mental health and growth and those sorts of things. It was very good. And then another book that I had started during my disappearance and finished in February was Bad Romance by Heather Demetriou. This book hits so much harder than I expected it to because it's a young adult book. I didn't think that the abuse in this book was going to be so real. I mean, I knew it was going to be real, but I didn't quite expect it to be this real and this spot on and unfortunately relatable. So that's not a spoiler. The title itself is called Bad Romance, so that's also a given. The main character in this book, her name is Grace, and she starts dating this guy named Gavin. They're both in drama together. He's a musician. She falls for him, and it starts really slowly and builds gradually into something more destructive and harmful, as most abusive relationships tend to do. She also has a very difficult home life. There's lots of addiction and mental health in her family as well, making home already not a safe place, and so you can see how everything lines up and how things progress with her and this boy. I would say, of course, there would be trigger warnings for domestic violence, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, those sorts of things, financial abuse. So if that's something that you do want to steer away from, then maybe this book isn't for you, or maybe not for you at this time. But if this is something that you can take on or something that you're interested in, I highly recommend. It was very moving. I definitely bawled my eyes out. It was so good. It does read a little young at the beginning, but also, to be fair, they're in grade 12. It's going to read young. I felt like it read a little bit younger than your senior year of high school, but it was mostly her friends that seemed that way. But I also really love her friends. I didn't like their group at the very beginning, but they all grew on me so much, and their friendship and that strong female friendship bonds was so important in this story, and the characters, it was so good, it was so real. One of the things that I loved in particular about this book is that it starts off with her narrating and her talking to him after their relationship has ended, so it gives you hope, but it also gives you an opportunity to look for and watch for these red flags that come up in the relationship, and some of them are so subtle and so smoothly integrated into things, and that's how these things do happen. I think I mentioned in my February video that I had been in a similar relationship in high school, so part of me when I was reading this really related to it on a personal level, but also it was so important for this to be told as a young adult story because these things do happen to women and young girls. Very emotional book. I definitely bawled my eyes out. I'm like emotional thinking about it now, but I would highly recommend for anyone that feels like they can take this on. But if you can't, no worries, because it's heavy. The next book that I finished in February is also quite heavy. Also, I would highly recommend, and also has a trigger warning for violence and sexual assault, so just a warning about that, but that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This story is so good. It follows our main character, Rin. She also doesn't have a very good home life, is about to be married off to someone. She's not interested in that at all, and she is trying very hard to get into this very prestigious school. It's a military school, and so she gets in. The first part, she is training at school, and it's like that school training montage, and I love that. I love that in books so much. I wish we could have had more of it, but I'm also not displeased with how the story progressed. I also feel like this book explored the trauma and the grief and the realities of war so well, and I really appreciated how raw and at the forefront the exploration of this was in the story. I hope that sentence just made sense. But it was just done so well, and also you can see the impacts of what all of this has and what her past has on Rin. And I know a lot of people don't like her because she makes bad decisions and she's kind of hot-headed, but I feel like it's really on point for her character. And yeah, this book overall was just really good. It's got some really interesting magic. I also love her master at school. I think it's Jang is his name. I really like him. He was a very funny and eccentric character. Overall, this is a really good book, and I cannot wait to pick up the next book. It is on my March TBR. Okay. This next book, if you watch my reading vlogs, you know how much I absolutely loved Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This book was so good. This book also has mental health. This book is the second book in the Locked Tomb trilogy. Hi, Nymeria. She had to jump in the video. Oh, cat interruptions they're fine. You're beautiful. Anyway, this is the second book in the Locked Tomb trilogy, and the first book was Gideon the Ninth, the second is Harrow the Ninth, the third one's going to be coming out, I think, in 2022, and is Alecto the Ninth, and each book so far in the series has followed the perspective of a different character, and so the first one you're in Gideon's head, in this book you're in Harrow's, and I loved Gideon the Ninth so much. Cat hair. It was one of my favorite books in all of 2020. Definitely, probably my top 5 books. I really liked it. You were very distracting. You want to lay down? Okay. Yeah, Gideon has such a hilarious perspective. She's sarcastic, she's rude, and she was a breath of fresh air, honestly. And then Harrow is a lot more refined. I mean, maybe refined isn't quite the word, but she's very different from Gideon. She's a lot more internalized, and yeah, I really like both characters. I really liked following Harrow. This book especially was really difficult to understand where it's going in the first probably like 3 or 4 parts of the book, because there's 5 acts in here, and it's intentionally done that way. Harrow is dissociating at the beginning and having a hard time coming to terms with what happened at the end of the first book, and it definitely had an impact on her. There's change in setting, a little bit of a change in cast, and yeah, it was really interesting. I loved this book so much. I guess synopsis-wise, it's about, there's 9 different planets in space. There's one guy who is the emperor and sort of rules all of them. Each of the houses is on a different planet, and they all have their own specific type of necromancy that they practice. And basically the emperor is looking for lictors, which is a really high-ranking, even more powerful type of necromancer, and so he's looking for them to be in his personal army to fight this thing that's going on. So that's what they're competing for in the first book, and in the second book they are exploring that, and it continues on, so I'm not going to say too much of how the first book ends, But yeah, this book was so good. I was left so confused for a lot of it, and then it all comes together at the end just to have everything blow apart again. It's so beautifully done. I love the way that Tamsin Muir writes. I feel like it's a book that you probably have to pay a bit more attention to while you're reading it, or at least I had to pay a bit more attention to it while I was reading it, but it was phenomenal. Probably going to be a favorite read of this year too. I buddy read it with my friend over at Bookworm Reflections, so go check out her channel too because she's awesome. But yeah, it was so good. It was so good. Towards the end of the month, I also snuck in Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This book was so cute. It is, I'm losing my voice. It's a young adult fantasy book that is kind of a King Arthur retelling, but I would also say kind of meets Shadowhunters. Just a little bit. It reminded me of that. It follows our main character Bree, who gets into college and she's there with her friend and there's some weird things going on at this school and she's trying to learn more about it. There's 3 different types of magic in here, which was so interesting. There were parts of the story that I feel like weren't really relevant plot-wise that we went through, but overall I liked the book. It was very fast-paced. It was so much fun. I love Bree. I loved the male lead characters. I loved her best friend. This explores a lot of grief and loss at the beginning too. Right at the beginning of the book she's coping with her mom's death and then she moves to this new school because a lot of the people in the one group of magic that she like meets and gets into, they're all white and she's not, and they treat her differently and she's not having any of it. So I really liked that. And there's a lot of a mystery element going on in here too, but I think that's all that I'm gonna say because I don't really want to spoil too much. But yeah, really good. I wish that there was a bit more information on the magic itself, but I'm assuming we'll probably get more of that in the next book. I also finished Becoming by Michelle Obama in February. This was a wonderful read. This explores her life when she was a kid, and then meeting Barack, and then law school and everything else that she's gone through, her career, her children, their life together, their experience in the White House, her experience as First Lady, then a little bit as her feelings and processes they were leaving the White House. It was very moving, and especially if you listen to the audiobook because she narrates it, fantastic. I loved hearing her tell me her story. It was beautiful. I just love her perspective and that she was not interested in politics. She was not excited about a lot of what was going on, but she still owned every decision that she made, and if there ever was insecurity, you see her grow from it. I also liked hearing about her family and her friends. There's also loss. Like, this book was just very moving, and I just adore Michelle Obama. So if you're interested, even slightly, I highly recommend you read this book. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm thankful I read it, and yeah, it was a good book. So this last book is the reason why it took me so long to film my wrap-up, is because I didn't finish it in February, but I did read the majority of it in February, and you'll know that especially if you watch my reading vlogs, but I finally finished The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This is going to be a new all-time favorite. I loved it. It was so good. It definitely, I wouldn't say it's fast-paced, just because you're following 3 main characters and you also get some other perspective chapters too, and it takes a while for things to progress in each of these characters' arcs and their storylines, but that's also because you're jumping from person to person and there's lots of setup and the world is so elaborate and the magic is amazing and there's so much that you don't know. In case you don't know about this book, this is the first book in the Stormlight Archive. It's going to be a 10-book epic fantasy series. I don't really know how to even sum up this book in a synopsis to really even talk about what this series is about, but it's high fantasy, epic fantasy. The main characters are Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar, and all of them are fantastic. At the very beginning, I may have been a little dismissive of Dalinar, but my goodness, does he turn it around! I like him! And not that he was dull or not a good character, it's just his chapters felt so much slower, and I wasn't as immediately intrigued in his chapters as I was with Shallan and Kaladin, but Oh my gosh, I feel like this first book is mostly about getting to know our characters and watching them come into themselves. I don't really know how else to explain it, but my goodness, I cannot wait to read Words of Radiance. Words of Radiance is not on my TBR for March because I'm a fool. So I have to read really fast and finish all of my books on my TBR so that I can get to that one because I really want to. I've also heard that one's fantastic. So yeah, I loved this book. I loved it so much. I even almost cried near the end of this book in anticipation or excitement. I don't really know how to describe, but I was feeling very overwhelmed about something that was happening and I was so excited about it and I was just like, bah! So yeah, I do cry when I read. I'm a crier, it happens. I don't always. Not every book makes me feel that way, but this one did in a different way than I felt in a long time. I don't think I've ever had a book that made me cry in excitement before, so yeah, fantastic. The last book that I'm going to add is a book that I think I finished in January, but I just forgot to include in my recent reads video. My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This book is about a girl in high school. I think she's 15 at the beginning, and she ends up in a relationship with her teacher. She's definitely coerced and groomed into this relationship, and it's dark. It's a dark and heavy book. Apparently, most of what I read had lots of mental health or grief or domestic violence or assault type underbase to it. Lately, I didn't intend that to be a theme, but we have it. But yeah, this book was really moving, really impactful. Of course, trigger warnings for assault. But if that's something that you feel you can take on, this book is entirely fictional. It's not based on any particular person's experience. But I still found it to be so moving. I really liked our main character. I liked her perspective. I liked the writing. One thing that I particularly liked about this book is that it was split timeline, so you are in her head and in her perspective at the very beginning as she meets this teacher and as he starts to groom her for this relationship and as she starts to think about what it means and if this is something she wants to do and how much autonomy she thinks she has at the time. And then it also has her perspective 15 years later when she's 30 and she's in counseling, and you just see how this situation has impacted her, how it's impacted her, the way she treats herself, her relationship with her friends and her family, any future romantic relationships. You see the effects of this relationship and all of that, and it was very moving. And definitely a really good read, but also another heavy book. So if you don't want a heavy book, I wouldn't recommend picking this one up at this time if that's not something that you feel you want to take on. But I thought it was very moving. It was really well written and it was very impactful. And I feel like it is pretty close to how people would react in these situations and how understandable and easy it is to empathize with her and everything that she goes through, especially with all of my work in mental health and crisis work and my psychology background. This was something that I felt was pretty accurate, and it was very sad, very moving, very impactful, and I don't want to tell you anything about the ending because I don't want to spoil how it goes, but I highly recommend this book if you feel like you are in a good space to take it on. So yeah, those are the books that I read. All of them were fantastic. Honestly, I have had a really good reading experience lately. I'm very happy with everything that I've read, and for anything that is in a series, I'm excited to pick up the next one, especially the Poppy War and the Stormlight Archive. I'm hoping to pick up in March if I get enough reading done that I can get to the Stormlight Archive, but otherwise, I am going to be reading The Dragon Republic in March. So excited. All of these books are fantastic. If you are interested in statistics, that's not normally something I include in my wrap-up videos, but I think it might be something that I will do moving forward. If you're interested, these 3 books and my Dark Vanessa I all read physically. Harrow the Ninth, Legend Born, and Becoming by Michelle Obama were exclusively on audiobook, and then this one I read the first 600 pages, and then the last bit of it I switched to audiobook, so this one was half and half. I have no idea how many pages all of this ends up adding to, but I think I'm going to start including that in my next videos. But thank you so much for tuning in to my most likely rambly wrap-up for February. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were. If you're going to comment spoilers, of course you're welcome to. Just make sure you hit enter a few times so that you're not spoiling it for anyone who hasn't read the books. Nymeria would like to thank you so much for watching the video, and I thank you too. Let me know your thoughts down below. Have a great rest of your day. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!